Okay then, so in this lesson we're going to have a look at how does geography affect the way you vote. Now, I'm going to replace the PowerPoint which I have on Teams on this because I've actually done a much better job in my opinion of this since then. Anyhow, so first of all, rural versus urban. Urban means towns and cities, rural means countryside. This can affect the way people vote. So if we have a look on the top, the further up you go, so from 0 to 25 is the more conservative you are. From 0 downwards, down to -25 is the more Labour you are. So if you have a look, from 1964 to 2010, rural areas, countryside areas have always been traditionally Conservative. And this is reflected if you ever see numbers, see the map of Britain coloured in blue and red for constituencies. Big rural constituencies are always dark blue. Big towns and cities like Manchester, Liverpool, London, which fit into this bottom line, are often very Labour. And you can see actually they become increasingly so. So countryside, countryside Conservative, towns, big towns and cities Labour. The real change which has happened in more recent times has been with smaller towns. You see, they've always just been about Labour since 1964. This again reflected in places like Nuneaton, isn't it? It's towns like Nuneaton, I would say, this kind of small town area. You see that places like Nuneaton have always been just about Labour. And then after 1997, they began to turn in a much more conservative direction. And from 2010 onwards, have actually gone over onto that more conservative side. So small towns like Nuneaton have become increasingly more conservative, which again is reflected in it. Nuneaton traditionally had Labour MPs. It then switched to the Conservatives in 2010, and that has continued. And again, there's many other small towns which have done that. Now, in terms of regions, this is the bit of the PowerPoint I've changed, which I'm going to put onto the Teams shortly. This took me ages last night. So I've gone through region by region and how they've voted in the last, since 1997, essentially. So this is Scotland. So as you can see on the right-hand side with the percentages, it traditionally was a Labour stronghold. 1997, Labour got 46% of the vote, 43, 40. And again, if you went to 1992 and the 1980s, again, it was predominantly a Labour area. Conservatives on 19, this very light yellow line is the Scottish National Party. You can see that 2015 was the change. So Gordon Brown, Labour and Scottish, that might explain the increase to 46% in 2010. But 2015, the Labour vote collapsed and the SNP dominated. And since then, it's now an SNP area, not a Labour area. And in fact, the Conservatives have gone from a poor third in 1997 to actually being ahead of Labour in 2017 and actually increasing their lead over Labour in 2019 as well. So Scotland's gone from safe Labour to safe Scottish National Party, and the Labour vote has collapsed in Scotland and kind of been replaced by the Conservatives as the second party. If you look at Wales, okay, green by the way is Plaid Cymru, which is like the SNP version of Wales. I didn't have the data enough to put it onto my graph, so you haven't got on the graph. But you can see a traditional Labour area. Again, the big countryside areas are in blue. So on the right hand side of Wales, you've got places like Monmouthshire and places like that. Very countryside. Lots of red at the bottom. That's around Cardiff and Swansea. There used to be lots of red at the top in North Wales, including Anglesey, which is that blue island on the top left. That went Conservative in 2019. But traditionally, very, very Labour. Look, 56% of the vote in 1997. The Conservatives, really from 2010, began to get a few more votes in Wales. And that's been increasing in recent elections. And in 2019, although Labour did beat the Conservatives, there is a 5-point difference there. You can see this rise of Conservative votes, which has flipped some of those kind of red wall seats in North Wales. Places like Wrexham and Rhyl and Anglesey has switched them into being Labour. I'm not quite sure what the Labour seat is at the top right there. Is it Chestnut? No, Chestnut in Wales, is it? I'm not sure which one it is. Anyway, you can see that. And again, you can see this Lib Dem vote collapse as well. in 2015, which mirrored what happened to them nationally. In terms of England then, when you look at northeast England, this is Newcastle and all that kind of area. Again, very dominant Labour, 63% in 1997. Tony Blair represented the seat of Sedgefield in the northeast of England. Mo Mowlam, who became the Northern Ireland Secretary, Peter Mandelson, all these key Labour people basically had seats in the northeast of England. And you can see how they've really dominated. Even as late as 2017, yes, the Conservatives saw a big increase of the vote, mainly at Lib Dem expense, you might argue, but Labour still had 54% of the vote. You can see why Labour thought they had it in the bag. Look how their vote collapsed in 2019. This was that big push by Boris Johnson to get these seats. This is the area where Labour lost all those red wall seats. Now, the map on the right-hand side is from 2017, but if you look at that, it's got a little arrow to Sedgefield, which is all red. That is now blue. Darlington is red on here. That is now blue. Bishop Auckland, that is now blue. Stockton South, I'm pretty sure that's blue. I'm feeling Redcar might be as well. So a lot of these red areas are now actually blue. This is an area which the Conservatives picked up their seats and gained that majority in the northeast of England. It's really where the Labour vote really did collapse quite massively. But traditionally, before that date, very, very Labour, very safe Labour. So we need to see what happens in the next election. Northwest of England, again, not quite as dramatic as the northeast, but again, an area which is dominated mainly by Manchester and Liverpool, which are those very red areas. Again, this map's from 2017. And Labour, as you can see, so it is a Labour area, and even today, Labour are, 6, 7, 8 points ahead of the Conservatives in this area. So it still is a pretty Labour area. But again, there were some inroads by the Conservatives in the north west of England. So if you look on this map, Crewe and Nantwich on the bottom, that went blue. Burnley went blue. Lee, which is pointed out, went blue. Barrow, actually, I think, went blue as well. So quite a lot of, and Workington went blue at the very top as well. So a lot of this area, again, they lost a number of seats to the Conservatives, but it is still, it's less strong Labour, which is still pretty Labour, isn't it? They're still ahead of the Conservatives and way ahead of the Liberals in this area. Moving across the Pennines, and we come to Yorkshire and Humber side. Again, there's a lot of countryside areas in Yorkshire, which you can see on this map, a lot of these very blue areas. Rushney Sunak's seat, which is Richmond, it's one of these top ones. I'm not sure it's the very top one or the other one, but it's around there anyway. You've also got these very urban areas as well, places like, around Bradford and Leeds and Keighley and all these sorts of areas, and Sheffield as well, of course. And again, it was a very strong Labour area. But really in 2010 is when it became much more competitive between Conservatives and Labour. Labour marginally ahead in those elections, but not massively so. And they flipped over to the Conservatives to be in the lead in 2019. So the change in Yorkshire and Humberside really came in 2010, you might argue. And again, it's reflected in a number of seats which Labour have lost in these sorts of areas. They lost, for example, Keighley. They lost some of the Sheffield seats, Don Valley, Rother Valley, etc., etc. Okay, moving south into the East Midlands. So this is basically, isn't it, Nottingham, Derbyshire area. Again, you can see that in 1997, fairly strongly Labour. And you just look at that Conservative rise, it's been quite steady, hasn't it? They seem to have gained a couple of points at every single election, and now they really dominate. 55% Conservative, 31% Labour. And again, that's reflected in some of the seats which Labour lost in the election of 2019. But that trend was also in place, really since about 2005, or at least 2010 at the very least. The Conservatives really put on votes in the East Midlands. The West Midlands, okay, again, used to be a Labour area. Lots of marginal seats in the West Midlands. This is like where we live, isn't it? Nuneaton, Birmingham area. But again, Labour used to be ahead in these areas. But again, it's a bit like the West Midlands. Only 2005 seems to be the turning point where it's very, very close in the West Midlands. And again, 2010 onwards, you're seeing this rise of Conservative vote. Although that said, the Labour Party have done okay in 2017 in this area and then dropped back again in 2019. And again, the map is from 2017, but you can see just how blue many parts are. The red bits are in that greater Birmingham, Coventry kind of area. and you got Stoke-on-Trent on the top. Well, of course, Stoke-on-Trent flipped over to the Conservatives in this election, and some of those Coventry seats were very, very close as well. So again, it's an area which is very competitive between the two, and the Conservatives at the moment seem to be on the high ground, if you like, in the West Midlands. Moving south, in the southeast of England, so East Anglia basically, it's traditionally quite a Conservative area. It was neck and neck in the 1990s under Blair, but again, you could, it's pretty, Labour's real high point, wasn't it, under Blair? And then the Conservatives have regained kind of their dominant force in East Anglia. In London, it's gone the other way in many respects. It was pretty Labour. They had a bit of a wobble in 2010, but Labour have reasserted themselves as the dominant party in London. It's become increasingly more Labour, I would say, as London. And some of these really posh suburb areas of London have also flipped over to the Labour Party, really since 1997, and have continued to do so. So even those posh suburb bits of London are turning a bit more red. So London has become more Labour. The southwest of England, so Cornwall and Devon, it's always been a Conservative Liberal kind of area, largely, especially down in Cornwall. And again, you can see the Conservatives have always had the edge in these elections. But again, since 2015 and that Liberal collapse, it's become a real safe kind of Conservative area, hasn't it? In fact, Labour kind of displaced the Liberal Party, but even then, they're just in some little islands of red, aren't they? Places like Plymouth and Exeter and places like that. So the southwest is pretty much a Conservative area. Again, it's very rural, isn't it, down there? If you ever go on your holidays to Cornwall, lots of countryside. And then the southeast of England, which also seems to include Milton Keynes and stuff, which I won't count as the southeast personally, but anyway, again, very much a Conservative area. And you can see on the graph, can't you, 42% Conservative in 19... So they're almost immune to Blairism, weren't they? And, it's become more and more Conservative. Labour, really now, there's quite a big gap between Conservatives and Labour. So again, a very much a Conservative kind of area. So I think the general message holds: countryside Conservative, towns and cities, or big towns and cities Labour. Scotland now SNP. Wales was traditional Labour, has become closer with the Conservatives. The northeast of England used to be very, very heavily Labour. The Conservatives have done really well there in 2019. Same for the northwest of England as well. And again, it's how is that going to be a permanent change or is it just a temporary change? Yorkshire and Humber side has been closer between Labour and the Conservatives. Coming south, the East Midlands used to be safe Labour, but has become increasingly a safe Conservative area. Similar story, you might say, for the West Midlands. And then London, very Labour. South East and South West, very Conservative. That kind of sums up what's been happening there. As I said, I'll pop this onto the Teams later on, and I'll replace the existing PowerPoint which I have on there.